And I guess the first question is, do you have questions from last week? Anybody? You'll find that as time goes on, there'll be lots more questions. So
I think I got on just a little bit late last time, and I think you told us like when we had to order by, if we were going to order.
the sooner is better. Right now, the nukes and the nukes are the things that are going to go first.
Okay.
So if you want to order a nuke, I would try to get in an order soon. So after this week, so by the end of today, hopefully you'll have some sense of what equipment you're going to go for, and so you can order a nuke. Either nukes primarily come in deeps, but they can also come in mediums. And if you're going to order a medium, I would do that really, really soon if you can. And if you can't get an order in, let me know, because I have some other resources. So if you can just either email me through amy@bumblingbeekeeper.com or amymoyle@gmail.com. And I will actually put both those in the chat here. And I can maybe help you find a medium or even a nuke if you can't even get a deep. So so there's that one, and then amymoyle@gmail.com. So you can just, and the other thing you can do is you can always text me with questions. The first time you text me, please let me know who you are so that I can get you into my contact list, and then I'll know who you are going forward. But feel free to text me too, the number's in there. So that's the big thing. If you're ordering packages, you got a little bit of leeway. And in fact, this year, we've got an extra 2 weeks because with the weather, all the packages are running late. So I will probably be doing some updates as I get them on the website for when packages are coming in or where they're expected. Oh yeah, question about plants and shrubs compatible with bees. Jeb, if you, I probably have your email address. I will just talk to you separately about that. That actually could even be a separate topic that we talk about. There's a really good book. Can you go down on my bookcase? There's a book on plants for bees.
Oh yeah.
That's really, really good. The other thing that I'll just mention is there's a group called Bee City that was started in Asheville, North Carolina. It's sort of like Tree City, except that it's for bees. And I'll put something about that out on my website, but they actually have lists of plants and stuff too that are really good for them. The other place I'll just mention quickly is if you are anywhere near Asheboro or can get to the Asheboro area, there's a nursery called Cure Gardens, CURE, and they specialize in native plants, and they're very, very knowledgeable about plants for pollinators and bees in particular. There's beekeeper people there too, so I'll put some of that stuff out there. So that'll be a topic for later, but I will start putting information out because this is a good time to be planting bushes and shrubs. So, okay, any other questions before we start with the equipment video? Okay, so okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple of polls just to check in. So the first one is really for existing beekeepers. And I'm just curious about what kind of equipment you have, and you can pick more than one. So if you have multiple kinds of equipment, that just to get a sense of who's got some equipment out there so that we know, you know, who we can engage in conversation as we talk about some of these things. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So we have, looks like 4 beekeepers, and I know one of them has Langstroth horizontal and top bar all. So yeah. So that's good. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this. And then I'm going to do another poll. And I know this is kind of early on, but if you're a new beekeeper and you're thinking about equipment, what kind of are you thinking about? This will help me figure out how much time to, give to each of these sections. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And most of the people are looking at Langstroth. Some of them are looking at top bar and horizontal hives. So we'll talk about all those things. I'm going to stop sharing. Right. Okay. So then the other thing I was going to mention, this is a book called Garden Plants for Honeybees. It's by Peter Linter, Lindtner. And I'll include this on my website. But anyway, this is a really good one if you're looking at plants. One of the things I like about it is it talks about when they bloom. So if you're looking for a variety of plants to kind of cover the whole year, so like in North Carolina, our big nectar flows are in the spring and in the fall. And if you want to figure out what the plant to sort of supplement in the middle, this is a pretty good one. There's some other resources that are really, really good too. And as I get them, I will add them to the website. And if you have suggestions, let me know and I'll give you credit on the website, because this is community. Bees are real communal, and so that's kind of what we're trying to do here as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and launch okay, so this one is about equipment, tools, and clothing. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the location of your apiary. And we talked a little bit about this last time, making sure that you had space and that you could have them in the sunshine most of the day, and that if you can, there's a windbreak and good water drainage and things like that. And making sure that your neighbors know about it and understanding what's going on around you. The other thing is when you orient your bees, wherever the entrance is, you want to orient the entrance toward the southeast, south, or east location. Basically, the idea being that when the sun comes up and hits the landing board, that's when it wakes up the bees and gets them out foraging. So you want them out foraging as early as they possibly can be. So those are all things that you're going to want to think about. There's some discussion about putting hives near farm animals, and especially horses. And one of our really good top bar beekeepers actually has horses, and so that hasn't really been an issue. I haven't seen that. And I had bees on the other side of the fence from cattle, and that was never really a problem. So and chickens under feet and all of that. So that hasn't really been a problem. If you're in bear country, you really need to make sure you can have an electric fence. Or if you're somewhere where there are teenagers, the saying is, if you're in the country, bears are a problem. In the city, it's 16-year-old boys. And there are various issues. So it could be that people will just vandalize, they'll push them over or whatever. The other thing is they'll actually take bees, they'll steal bees. That's becoming a real problem. So those are all things that you can think about. So in North Carolina, there are 4 types of hives that can be used, and they all have removable frames. And quickly, once again, there's the Langstroth hive, there's the top bar hive, either the Kenyan or the Tanzanian, and this one is a Kenyan. It's got the sloping sides, and it's the most common one. There's the Ware hive, which is kind of a cross between the two. And you can see in the picture on the right, I don't know what happened to my mouse, but you can see in the picture of the right that there's just a little bit, it's a top bar plus a little bit down the side. And when we talk about them, you'll see those in the frames. There's also horizontal or long hives, and there's actually two kinds of horizontal long hives. One of them is actually based on a Russian design, and the other one is basically just a modified for Langstroth frames. So the Langstroth is the most common. It's the one you see the most. It's been around for a long time. It's, boxes stacked on top of each other. Almost all the pollinators use the Langstroth equipment. And you can also use it as a modified Warre hive. And now when we talk about Warre hives, I'll talk about that a little bit more. So those are the ones that you see mostly. And for a really long time, the 10 frame was the only one out there. And the 8 frames were considered garden hives with those really pretty roofs, the copper roofs and everything in the garden. But things have changed. So we're going to talk about all the different components you need for a Langstroth hive. And some of these components will carry over into the other kinds of hives we're talking about. So the first thing is a stand, and it's an optional piece of equipment. You basically are elevating the bottom board, which is the floor of the hive, off the ground. It helps reduce the dampness in the hive. And in North Carolina, humidity is a really serious problem. So you really want to do what you can for dampness. And it'll extend the life of the bottom board, because if it's not sitting on the ground, it's not molding and deteriorating. It'll help keep the front entrance free of grass and weeds. And the big thing is it helps keep predators away. We have a problem with our cat. You may notice her come and go. Just put her in timeout in the bathroom. That'll be a good place for her. Sorry, Liz. She's perfectly fine until we get on. She just likes Zoom for, I guess it's my energy she's picking up. I don't know. Anyway, so stands are really important. And these are some different examples of stands. I typically do 2 cinder blocks with 4x4s. One of the things that I like is I like to do, at least 8 foot or 6 foot 4x4s, because I like to be able to have space to put equipment down as I'm working in the hive. Otherwise, you're putting things on the ground, and there can be issues with that. Like you could leave your queen in the grass, which could be a problem. You can also put them up on cinder blocks. And when I'm doing splits and different things where I have more equipment than I have space for on my stands, it's not uncommon to put them on a couple of cinder blocks. But you want them up high, because skunks in particular they love bees. They love them. They don't care about the honey. They're in it for the protein. And so they'll get up their front paws and they'll scratch at the entrance, and the bees will come out and then they'll eat them. And the only part of the skunk, their mouth is impervious to the stings. The only part that is a problem is their bellies. So you want these critters up high enough that their bellies are exposed. So that's one reason to get things up on a stand. And there's different kinds of stands. You can kind of do it yourself, or you can actually even buy stands that have legs, and you can do real fancy kinds of things. There's lots of things available in terms of stands available right now. So the skunk is, like I said, a really big one. The other one is your back. If you're picking up heavy equipment, and it can be, if you've got a 10 frame deep with a lot of honey in it, it can weigh 70, 80 pounds, and you're picking those up, and you may be picking them up from head height and putting them on the ground and picking them up. You can really do damage to your back. So take care of your back and all this. And that's one of the things that we really seriously have to consider when we're looking at cost of all these things, because if you really do damage to your back, and we have a beekeeper who wears a brace now, so keep that in mind, because that's just part of it, the expense. So then there's these things that show up in bee catalogs, and they're listed as hive stands, and you actually, you can put them on the ground. A lot of times you'll see them, somebody will just put a pallet down and then put one of these on top of them, and they also will give airspace. They'll give a little bit more protection to the bottom board, but you'll notice that that front, that's just a really nice landing board for the bees. So when foragers are coming back, it's a nice place for them to land. So those are kind of nice to have. I had one, and I ended up, when I sold a bunch of my bees because I was having some pesticide issues in the neighborhood, I sold the landing board along with it. So that was kind of too bad. But the other thing is, I've noticed in looking at some of the new equipment, there are some stands that have landing boards attached to them. And in the list of manufacturer, or the places, the bee supply places that I list on my website, there'll be a new one coming online in the next couple weeks, and they're doing some custom stuff. So I'm going to see if I can get them to do a stand. They do really nice stands anyway, but I'm going to try to get them to do a stand with a landing board on it. And if we can do that, I'll let you know about that. So if you see, if you're looking at hive stands and you see these things, that's what that's about. So then there's the bottom board, and there's two different kinds of bottom boards. There's screen bottom boards and there's solid bottom boards. Solid bottom boards are what was traditional. A lot of beekeepers still use the solid bottom boards. A lot of the old beekeepers absolutely swear by the solid bottom boards, because they think that the screen bottom boards have issues during the cold. They think that the bees move up faster because you know, the basically the brood box is open to the air in the bottom. And in North Carolina, one of the reasons we use screen bottom boards is because of the humidity. So it's good for extra airflow. And I deal with the we're not worrying about the screen bottom board in the wintertime. And I can talk about how I do that. So the bottom board is the floor of the colony. And it includes takeoff and landing platforms. So the very front of it is the takeoff and landing part. It's open in the front, and the hive should also be tilted just slightly forward, so that when it rains, you don't want the rain running back into the hive, especially if you have a solid bottom board, because then you'll have puddles of water in there. So you really don't want that. So one of the tools that I don't talk about when we get to the tools is a level, because keeping your hives level. So you want them to be able to tip forward a little bit, but you want them horizontally to be level. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about frames. You can be the solid or the screen bottom board. Screen bottom boards are also known as IPM boards. IPM is integrated pest management. And it's just different things. When we start to talk about pest in particular, but also just seasonal management, we'll start to talk about integrated pest management, things that we can do to help the bees stay healthy. So integrated pest management screen bottom board means lots of airflow and not a lot of moisture. Both the small hive beetles and the varroa like moisture. So that's part of the reason why we're now doing screen bottom boards and also putting them in the sun all the time. And there's also an entrance reducer that can be added to the opening. And this is what an entrance reducer looks like. They usually cost $1 or $1.50. They're not very expensive. They have two openings. They have a bigger one and a smaller one, and you can take them out if you want. But basically, we use those at different times of the year so that the bees will be able to guard their entrance. If a bee is in a tree, it's not going to have a huge humongo entrance. It's going to have a very small entrance that their guard bees can protect them. And so this is one of the standard things that we use. There are other kinds. When we start talking about maintenance and just working with the bees, we'll also be talking about something called a robbing screen. And I've gotten to the point where I just use robbing screens year round. And they have, different entrances, and the bees will adapt to it, and it gives them a little bit more airflow, and they're a little more expensive. I think I pay about $20 a piece for those. So they're a little more expensive, um, but I almost never am without an entrance reducer. Some beekeepers during the nectar flow take them out altogether. When we start talking about life cycle of bees and how all that works in the hive, I'll talk a little bit about bees coming back with nectar, forager bees coming back with nectar, and how that's handled in the hive. Um, one of the reasons for taking it out, taking the whole entrance reducer out, is you can get more bees back to the inside the hive that way. That's not necessarily gonna be, the bees aren't going to see that as an advantage because of the way they deal with nectar coming back in. But the one advantage is if you have a solid bottom board, you get a little bit better airflow that way. So that's another reason to do that. But because of robbing, I typically either go with the bigger entrance or the little entrance, and never ever take the whole thing out. So I want to talk a little bit before we talk about frames and boxes and things. I want to talk a little bit quickly about the way a brood nest is organized. And this is, if you're looking at bees in the trees, what they'll do is the middle part is the brood. So that's where the baby bees, where the queen lays the bees, and then around it is the bee bread, or the pollen. So that's that orange part that you see. And then around that is where the honey is. And then if there's lots of honey, they'll put honey above that. So you've got the brood kind of in the middle, and then the pollen, and the pollen is only fed to the baby bees. The emerged bees are not really eating the pollen. And then above that is the honey, and then up, and the big bees are eating the honey. That's how they get all their energy. So typically, when we're looking at different hives, we have to be able to visualize that in the hive. Okay, so there are different hive bodies when you're dealing with the Langstroth. So this is what a hive body looks like with frames, and in what you'll find is the hive bodies will have are called different things based on how they're used, right? So the standard size boxes that hold the frames, that's what the hive body is. If it's used for brood, it's a brood chamber, it's a brood box. If it's used for honey, we call them supers. And typically the brood boxes were the deeps, and the honey boxes were the shallows. But then we've added all these other boxes along the way. So we have deeps, we have mediums, we have shallows. So there's various combinations of that right now. And so the deeps are about 9 5/8 inches high, mediums are 6 5/8, and shallows are 5 1/6. And in the book, she talks about something called an extra shallow. They use it for cut comb. I have never seen those used. I've never even seen them for sale. You can always do cut comb foundation for medium and shallow. And I think a lot of people just use shallow if they're going to do cut comb. And there's 3 widths of boxes. So there's the 5 frame, which is a wooden nuke. There's the 8 frame, and there's the 10 frame. So there's lots of variations. So you have to figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, right? Before I talk about frames, I'm going to talk a little bit about why you would pick one over the other. So the traditional was the 10 frame deep, and still in countries like New Zealand and Australia, that's all they do is deeps, and they use them for honey, they use them for brood, they use them, it's just everything. Traditionally in the US, and still a lot of the beekeepers will do 1 or 2 deep, 10 frame deeps, and then shallows above that for honey. And the shallows are typically 30 or 40 pounds. A 10 frame shallow full of honey is typically 30 or 40 pounds. If you get a deep full of honey, it's probably 80 to 90 pounds, depending on how you do it. When we went with the 8 frame is a little more manageable. When I first started, I did all medium 8 frame, and 3 8 frame mediums high is the same as 2 deeps high. And for me, that was easy because number one, all the equipment was exactly the same and I could interchange easily between the two. And they never got more than about 40 or 45 pounds. And so I could manhandle those just fine. Then I started to experiment. And one of the things I started to experiment with was, and there was I'll do a link if I can find it. There was a video on natural beekeeping where the woman did 3-sided frames. So here's a picture of a frame, and you can see frames have 4 sides. So what she would do is she would take just the top frame and the 2 side frames and do a starter strip of foundation and she would take 2 medium boxes and stack them up and put the frame in the top and let the bees build down 2 box worths. So it was deeper than a deep, a little bit. And so I started to do that. That's kind of a modified Warre hive. And what I found was my bees did better because the queens did better because it was more contiguous brood space. If you do 2 boxes, between every box that you have frames in, there's a little bit of space. So it's not going to be contiguous. And so then I decided what I would do. The 3-sided frames, I still have 3-sided frames. They get a little unwieldy. So then what I decided to do was do a deep brood box. It's still 8 frame. I'm still doing 8 frame. I've done 10 frame too, but I've done 8 frame because I can manage those better. I'm doing a deep 8 frame with a medium 8 frame on top of it, and then shallows on top of that. And I'll tell you what, the problem with that is sometimes I end up with shallow frames in a medium box. Sometimes I end up with medium frames in a deep box. You kind of do whatever you're going to do, and it can kind of be a mess. So, but there's IPM reasons why you might actually put a shallow frame in a medium box or a medium frame in a deep box, and we'll talk about that later. But just to give you an idea of all the various variations that are out there and why whatever you do initially may not carry through. And we make fun of each other all the time, but it's just kind of the way things go. So with all that being said, now we're going to talk a little bit about frames. So one of the nice things about the Langstroth hives is the frames are 4-sided. And one of the advantages to that is you can put it in a honey extractor and be able to extract the honey. If you don't have a 4-sided frame, you can't really put it in a honey extractor, and your choices are either to just sort of uncap it and let it drip, or do crush and strain. And beekeepers care a lot about the comb that gets built and keeping the comb that they get built for as long as you can. We try to recycle it at least every 5 years because wax will accumulate pesticide. But the thing to know if you're keeping bees primarily to accumulate honey is it takes a bee about 8 times as much nectar to make wax than it does to make honey. So that's one of the reasons why people tend to keep their wax longer and they don't like to do crush and strain. So that's one of the payoffs for all of this. None of this is easy. Otherwise, it's kind of an adventure. So there's 3 size frames. There's, one for the shallows, one for the mediums, one for the deeps. The end bars are the things that are typically different. The top bars and the bottom bars are all the same width. It's the sidebar that's gonna determine the difference of the height. And they have these little shoulders on them. And the reason they have shoulders is so that you get the right spacing. When we talk about bees, we're going to talk about bee space. And the bee space is the amount of space between comb so that two bees can pass each other easily. And so the little shoulders make sure that when the bees are building comb, that there's enough space between them that the bees can pass easily. So that's why there's shoulders on those things. And there's also holes on the side. So if you're doing just regular wax, or if you're even doing just a strip and letting the bees build their own wax or whatever, you might put stabilizing wires. I use when I'm letting the bees build their own comb, I use plastic fishing line. I just string it through the holes and just sort of zigzag it back across. And the bees will actually build the wax over that, and it helps keep it in the frame and gives it a little bit more stability. So you can put pins in. I mean, there's lots of reasons. When you start looking at foundation, it'll become clear why you might want those holes for stabilizing. Foundation comes in all kinds. So foundation is basically a starter sheet that you put in the frame that the bees then will build up on. And there's wax, there's plastic with wax coating on it, and there's a couple different kinds. There's ones with very thin wax with wax coating. There's also just plastic with no wax coating. There's what's called crimped wire, which is wax that has already wires in it that work really well if it's going to go into an extractor. So it's already imprinted, and the place where the wax foundation comes from is the different manufacturers buy wax from other beekeepers, and then they basically melt it down and they make these imprinted sheets, and then you can just buy the sheets, and they're typically $1.50 or something like that a piece, depending on, the more you buy, the cheaper it is. It's one of those things. The other thing you can do is, in the top of the frame, you can just put a strip of foundation and the bees will actually build down. Or you can put even like a paint stick or something up there small and coat it with wax, and the bees will build down from that as well. So you can let them build their own wax as well. And the kind of foundation you choose will matter based on the kind of frames that you buy. So when you go to buy frames, they'll say, do you want wedged or grooved top bar? Do you want grooved or split bottom bar? And if you have no idea, and then they'll ask you what kind of foundation you want. And if you have no idea, you know, usually the people in the bee supply will talk to you about what you need. And I'll show you some pictures in just a second, but groove top bar and groove bottom bar are the ones that are typically used with the plastic foundation. And my experience has been, if you don't know what you're going to do, go with the wedge top and the split bottom bar. Okay, so this is kind of what the difference is. So on the left, you'll see there's a groove top and a groove bottom. And the groove top looks a lot like the wedge top, except if you look just below, I wish my pointer worked, but on the wedge top to the very left, that strip to the left, you'll see that it's actually cut. And so what you can do is you can pry it up, and then if you're using something like crimped wire foundation, which has little wires that have little hook things, you put the crimped wire in, and then you nail that strip back on top of it. And so that's the difference. And the split bottom is just open all the way to the bottom. And it's lots easier to clean out when you're reusing frames, to just because you can run something through there and clean it out. And so it's a little bit easier. So my advice is, If you don't know what you're going to do, go with the wedge top and the split bottom, because you don't actually even have to take that little wedge part off. You can just leave it as it is and just pop things in there. And so this is what wax looks like that's been drawn in a hive, in the frame. The next part is the inner cover, and different inner covers have different, are made differently. This one is a Brushy Mountain inner cover, and Brushy Mountain is no longer in business, but I really liked their inner covers best because they were a little thicker, and they have, you see they have the little groove in the very front. You could use it as another entrance, or what I would do is I would have it to the front, and so if during the winter I had moisture accumulating, it could just run down the inner cover and out the front and down the front of the hive. And so I really like those, but they don't really make those anymore. But some companies still do, so it's something to consider. Inner covers rest on top of the uppermost super or hive body. They prevent the bees from gluing down the outer cover, although I'll just tell you, my bees can glue down anything. So that's not always a given. They give you a little more airspace so that there's a little bit more circulation. And it also protects the interior of the hive. So when you take the outer cover off, the bees are not automatically exposed to light. You can smoke them a little bit and they can get some smoke in there. If there's moisture, it'll accumulate up there. You could put leaves and things up in that area to accumulate the moisture during the winter. So it just really kind of helps them with a bunch of stuff. And it's also access for things like the hive feeder or a bee escape. And we'll talk about those later. But if you noticed in the picture of the, I don't know if I can, yeah, you see the circular hole in the top of the thing. You can put a bee escape in there, and what the bee escape does is bees can come out, but they can't go back in. They have to go back through the front. And so if you're gonna process honey and you want all the bees to leave from the honey part of it, you can use a bee escape to keep them out, or to get them to go out and to go back into the bottom, but not into the honey super. So that's something you can use it for. And you can also, if you want to do feeding, you can also put like a jar or something that has food dripping and put it over top of that hole. And then you'd put an empty hive body over top of that, and then the cover on top of that. And it's a way of feeding the bees without exposing the food to other bees that would create robbing. So that's all the different things about the inner cover. And then a queen excluder is an optional piece, and it can be metal or it can be plastic, and it's got these little holes. Worker bees can get through, but the queen can't. And one of the reasons people like to use queen excluders is if the queen can get up into where the honey supers are, she can be laying up there. If she's laying up there, the bees are going to be putting pollen up there. And you have to, you can't just take the whole box off and put it through the honey extractor. You'll have to, there'll probably be a mix of brood and pollen in most of the frames, and so it'll affect how much access you have to the honey. One of the things that will happen, though, that you can't just put it on and walk away forever. So there's two times you really have to pay attention. One is young drones, the male bees, can get through there, and then they'll get fat and they won't be able to get back through, and so then they could starve and die and block it. So you need to go in periodically and clean them out. The other thing is you absolutely have got to get it out of there before you get into winter, because if you've got a queen excluder between the honey and the bees, during the winter, the bees will move up. The bees will move up and the queen won't be able to go with them, and then you'll end up without a queen. So that's another reason. There's other ways that we use queen excluders. when we do splits of hives, and we'll talk about that later when we talk about using them. But I don't really use a queen excluder very much except when I'm doing splits. But anyway, lots of people use them. So that's something, and they're relatively cheap. So a plastic one's maybe $5. The outer cover, there's two kinds of outer covers. This is a telescoping outer cover, and it actually fits over top and down a little bit. And they typically have some kind of aluminum over the top of it, and it's to help protect the wood a little bit. So it protects the hive parts from the weather. It fits over the inner cover and the top edge of the uppermost hive body. Sometimes it's covered with sheet metal, sometimes not. Sometimes you just have to get really good paint on there. And so if you have an inner cover, when you take the top cover off, you can smoke the bees. You know, you basically lift the top cover, put some smoke in there, put the top cover down, give the bees a couple of minutes before you get into the hive. So it kind of makes it easy. The other thing that I do with the top cover, is because, and I learned this from a beekeeper, Larry O'Connor, who is in Michigan, and he speaks at a lot of conferences and stuff. I actually write on the top cover with a Sharpie. So rather, you're going to want to keep notes of what's going on in the hives, and there's some sort of big notes that I will keep separate, but I'll write on, like with the Sharpie, I can write on the top of the hive, and then over time it washes off. So the next time I'm in there, I know, okay, last time I said I was going to look at this, and now I really need to do that. So it's also a way of tracking information. And, beekeepers do all kinds of interesting things, rocks and twig formations on top of their hives, just to give them ideas like, this one needs a new queen or whatever. I just like the Sharpie on top of writing on top of it. And if I don't have, like on my nukes, they're just wood, I have some red duct tape, and I just put strips of tape, and then I just write on those. So that's just something else you can do. The other kind of outer cover is a migratory cover, and they tend to just be wood and kind of plain. They fit flush, so they're not hanging over. There's no, they're not bigger at all. You don't use an inner cover with them. They just go right on top. And they're lightweight, easy to move. And one of the big reasons for using them, and one of the reasons they're called migratory covers, is because the folks who are moving bees around for pollination use them. It's easy to strap a whole bunch of colonies together if you're using migratory covers, and you can put bees right next to each other. Put her back, please. So I have migratory covers on two of my wooden nukes, and I'm going to switch them over to inner covers and telescoping this year, but they're not bad to use either. So, and so this is how everybody fits together. So you can have a hive stand on the bottom. You see that nice big landing board, and then the entrance reducer fits back a little bit. So they're still on the bottom board. There's still a landing place for the bees. And then you'll do your different hive bodies. And if you choose to do a queen excluder, it'll go between where the brood is and where the honey supers are, and then an inner cover, and then some kind of outer cover, or a migratory cover instead of inner cover, outer cover, if that's what you're choosing to do. So that's kind of how they all fit together. When we talk about hive ventilation, moisture is a big issue. And so the screen bottom board is kind of important. And also what I do, a lot of beekeepers will give a little bit of airflow, like 1/8 of an inch. A bee can fit through 1/4 inch. So you want it less than that, because you don't want other bees being able to get into the hive, but you want to develop airflow coming through the hive. I don't do the sides like that. I actually just put a little block in the back that will raise the back of the outer cover just 1/8 of an inch, so that air's coming in through the front and the bottom, and it can flow through and come through the back. So it gives you some airflow. So that's one thing to also think about. And I said that I would let you know a little bit about, beekeepers that are concerned about um, the screen bottom board and air getting in and the bees moving up. For one thing, the screen bottom boards, they typically come with an insert that you can put in to basically close them off. So if you needed to do that, you could do that. I like to have my screen bottom boards open all year round. And I've talked to beekeepers in the far north, in Minnesota, in Canada, and they also, because of the moisture, go with the screen bottom boards and have had no issues related to that. What I do is I wrap my stands, because what will happen is if there's air rushing through, it'll actually pull heat out of the hive. And so by wrapping the bottoms of the stands, and I just use a cheapo house wrap that I get at Lowe's hardware, and just wrap around the bottom of the stand. And then the other thing that happens is I get this nice little environment that's actually, it's sort of like a little solar environment down there. It's holding a little bit of heat. And so that's been good for the bees too. So that's kind of what I do. And that's when I had bees in Pilot Mountain. You can see Pilot Mountain in the background. And over the fence there were cows or, cattle. So you can have animals close by. And you can't see, but there were chickens that were hanging around the beehives on this one too. So that's kind of the Langstreth, and then with the Langstreth, there's other equipment you may need. So you can do in-hive feeders. The one on the top left is a Boardman feeder. You put syrup in it. It fits in place of a frame. You need to put something in there, some sticks or something that the bees can sit on so they don't drown. The one in the middle is an external feeder. I never use those, and some of the experts say just don't do that, but a lot of people use them. A lot of bee suppliers recommend that you use them because they're cheap. You can just put a jar of syrup in it. I prefer doing internal feeding always because of the robbing situation. So the other thing about these things is because of air pressure changes, it can lose air pressure and you can just lose your syrup. And so that could be a problem. To the far right is baggy feeding. That's something that I do through the summer months pretty much all the time. You basically put your syrup in a I use freezer baggies because they're a little sturdier. You lay it on top of the frames and then you just cut a little hole in it once it's there, and the bees will go up and eat just like from a trough. If you're going to do baggy feeding, you're going to need a wedge or some kind of a shim around it so that you get a little extra space, or you can even put a shallow, an empty shallow hive body on top of it. On the bottom are a couple of different kinds of in-hive feeders. Basically, these fit on the top under, you can put them underneath the inner cover, or a lot of times the apiary inspectors recommend that you just get rid of the inner cover while you're using them and just put the outer telescoping cover over top of them. And what happens is with the one on the left, the bees come up in the middle, and then there are floats so that they can sit on the floats and suck up the sugar syrup. The one on the right, it actually, you see the screening there, the bees come up and then they can walk around on the screening and eat it. And they both will hold about 2 gallons of syrup. And I use those in the early spring, like soon, within the next couple of weeks, or real late in the fall. And I don't use them during the summer. And when we start talking more about bee whatever, I'll show you the mistake I made with the top feeder in the summertime during robbing season. And it was really, I had, that was full of dead bees. So anyway, so those are just some of the different kinds of feeders. And then this is just what a shim looks like on top, to make room for the baggie. And you can make your own shims. I basically took some, 2-inch high, wide wood and just cut it and nailed it together and just made a 2-inch shim. And You can buy shims, or you can just make them yourself. They're pretty easy to make. They're not fancy. You don't have to do mitered corners or anything like that. So that's a shim for baggy feeding. Painting the hive, you don't have to paint the outside of the hive, but it'll extend the life of the equipment. And you only want to paint the parts that the bees aren't going to have access to. So just the outside parts, and use a good latex. Typically we say a light colored paint because of the being able to reflect the sun and keep it cool inside the hive. We don't use oil paint because of the toxins for the bees. So, and some of the beekeepers will do things like they'll go to the hardware store and see what kind of external latex house paint got returned, and they just buy that. And so you'll see lots of colorful hives. So buying new equipment, unassembled, you can buy it assembled or unassembled. Unassembled is a little bit cheaper than assembled. It's usually pretty easy to assemble equipment. You need to make sure that you buy your equipment at least a few weeks before you think you're going to get your bees, because there'll be back orders this time of year and you need time to get it together and get it painted and all that other stuff. And the only thing is, if you're going to get your bees in a couple weeks, go ahead and put the foundation in the frames. But ongoing, it's probably not a good reason to do that, because it'll depending on where you've got your stuff, if it's too warm, it'll start to melt and warp and whatever, and you can end up just ruining foundation that way. So that's just a couple of different things. Used equipment, be careful when you're buying used equipment is all I'm going to say. Make sure that you know something about the beekeeper who you're buying it from and what their practices are. And some of the really old beekeeping equipment is not the same. They're not going to fit the same. So for example, I have some really old bee equipment that my telescoping top that is more current doesn't fit over, because it's just a little too big. So those are all things that you need to know about, and they can be contaminated. The big one is American foul brood. And it's just make sure you know the beekeeper. If you think that you don't know anything about it and that it could have American foul brood, talk to the apiary inspectors, because they can actually, I don't know if they still have this working, but they actually have a way of killing everything. They have a machine that was used for sanitizing moon rocks, and they use it on bee equipment a few times a year, and it's relatively inexpensive. But just know who you're buying your equipment from. And if it looks like it's rotting and whatever, don't go there. Just don't. Okay, any questions about Langstroth? Are there any questions?
Not one, but actually.
Okay, how are we doing on time?
Oh, we got 3 minutes.
Ooh, I'm gonna run late, guys. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know. Okay, top bar hives. I'm probably going to go late, and so I'm sorry about that. But okay, top bar hives. The Kenyan is the most common one used. It's the one with the slanted sides. It used to be mostly Langstroth, and now you're starting to see a lot more top bars. And manufacturers are offering top bars. With the Langstroth, if you figure about $20 a box and about $3 a frame, that gives you some idea about what it's going to cost. With the top bar, if there's lots of plants that you can make your own. If you're going to buy them, they're usually $250 up to $600, depending on if they have windows or fancy things. Locally, Daydant is starting to sell top bar hives for $270 or something. And there's actually a Daydant office about a mile north of Greensboro in Virginia. So you could, shipping would be expensive, but you could drive up there and get it. So let me just say, is Elise here with us? If Elise is here, unmute yourself and speak up.
I'm here.
Oh, yay. Hi.
Hey,
Okay,
how
so
are you?
Elise is our resident top bar person. And in fact, that is her right there in the top bar, and that's her top bar. So Elise, do you want to take over?
Yes, I mean, we built our top bars, or my husband did, I supervised, and then painted. There's some really good plans online, and if you know somebody that's reasonably handy, they can be built relatively inexpensively. You shouldn't use treated wood of any kind for obvious reasons. So we just use the plain pine, and of course, nothing on the inside is painted, just the outside of the hive is painted. We built legs on it. If I had to do it, if we had to do it over again, I would not put legs. I would just sit them, take the legs off and just sit them on a platform and do them that way. Now, if you do that, you would have to change your entrances. I have side entrances on mine, but you can use end entrances on your top bars as well. When you cut your bars for your top bars, you need to measure very, very carefully. The ones that the brood are on are a little bit wider, and I don't have the measurements right in front of me, and I don't know, I didn't have time to grab my notes. But measure very, very carefully, because if you even build it a fraction of an inch too wide, what happened to me was that the bees would actually draw 2 sheets of comb on one bar. So it made it really difficult to inspect. Now, I don't get whipped about much, so I didn't get whipped about that either, kind of thing. But it does make it harder to inspect your frames and that kind of thing. The one thing about top bars I will say is when you examine your frames, you do not go in on a hot day. The only thing holding it is where it's attached at the top. And when you move your bars around, you cannot tip them forward or backward. You have to move them on a horizontal plane. Otherwise, if it's the least bit warm out and that gets heavy, a top bar that's full of wax and brood and bees and stuff weighs about 7 pounds, and that is more than enough to just break it off. So when you inspect your top bars, inspect your your brood and all that kind of stuff. Move it very, very carefully. Amy, stop me if you have any questions or there's something you want me to cover.
Can you talk about using just the regular top bar from a Langstroth?
I have. And actually, if I had to, you can see those. So the ones that are the closest, the ones that are on the right in this picture are from the, and I would do that if I had to do that over again. It makes it a lot easier than just trying to cut your pieces of wood. And what I did to get started with the grooved top bars for a Langstroth frame is I took popsicle sticks, or whatever you want to call them, paint sticks. I dipped them in wax and I just stuck them in the top. Or if you're really ambitious, you can cut pieces of wax frame, dip them in wax, and then just cement them, stick them in there. And that way your bees have a little something to get started as far as, for them to draw comb. So that to me, if I had to start over again, now you can see the hair clip on this one. So if you have a piece of comb fall off, which has happened to me innumerable times, what you can do is buy those huge hair clips at Walmart or Dollar General or whatever. And I anchor them with ziplock, those zip ties to the top, and I put the comb underneath and I secure it with the zip ties, and I squeeze it open and I anchor it. I grab my wax that way, and they will just build around it, as you can see from this picture. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, but honestly, the best thing to do is basically forego inspecting your hive. I'd say if it's over 90 degrees out, it's just too warm and it's not stable.
Elise,
Um,
can you talk about when you added packages and about, keeping the bees from absconding? Did you add wax to it to get them to stay better?
so what I would do, so when I first started with top bars, mine had never had bees in them. And honestly, trying to get them to stay was incredibly difficult. I went through, I don't know how many packages before got one that decided to stay and draw comb. If you were going to do top bars, I would try to find somebody that have some bars with some drawn comb on them that will, that you can put in your hive. I think they're more likely to stay. And so what I do is I use, there's also follower boards that you put in, and that is basically to reduce your space in your top bar. Mine are 3 feet long. And I don't know, no, I don't, there's not a follower board that you can see, but
No.
well, it is, but you can't see what it looks like. It's all the way on the left,
Yeah, there's
on
nothing.
the bottom picture. It's all the way, not on the left, on the right. And what it is it's a solid piece of wood that is basically the same shape as the inside of the hive. And what you do is you use your follower boards to reduce the space. You don't want the whole hive open when you're putting a package in. So what I would probably do is put 4 or 5 frames in, and then leave an open space like you see right here on the right. Put your follower board in. And when I shake my package in, what I do is I tip the package in, and then I take the queen box that the queen is in, and I secure it between 2 bars in the hive, and I just leave it hanging there. And that you would do the same as you would for packaging any other. I mean, I go in after a couple days to see how the bees are reacting to the queen in the box. And at that point, if things are fairly calm, I'll go ahead and pull the cork out. There's 2 ways you can feed them. It's easy to feed with baggies in a top bar hive, or you can sit it in the bottom. You can sit your, so I use an entrance feeder like you would see with the jar and the entrance thing, and you can sit that in the bottom of your hive in the open space, and you can feed them that way as well. The other thing I do is I have 3 entrance holes on the sides of my hives. So I reduce, I put like bundles of grass, or I've even used paper towel, and I close up 2 of the holes, and I just leave 1 hole open. But some people are starting to make nukes for top bars, but I have not found anybody that does that. Top bars require a little bit more management. Excuse me, they tend to, swarming is a little bit more of a problem. So I think with top bars, I mean, I try to go in every 7 to 10 days, which sounds like a lot. But, and you don't have to go in and spend a lot of time in there, but you just want to make sure that they have enough room and that kind of thing, because swarming does seem to be more of an issue. I have both Langstroth and top bars. I get more swarming in my top bars than I do with my Langstroths. And, as far as splits, I don't do them any differently. I don't worry about, I generally, even with my Langstroth, do a walkaway split. And I think you'll probably explain that later, Amy, down the line.
Right.
But I do that with my top bars. If I'm going to make a split, I will just do a walkaway split. I make sure that I leave the queen in one hive with plenty of brood and all that kind of stuff. And then I just, move the stuff into the new hive with plenty of eggs, nurse bees, that kind of thing, and let them raise their own queen.
Right.
Yep. And so, and in the winter, or, at the appropriate time of the year, you can put pollen patties in there. I just sit them on top. Or again, I have screened bottom boards in my top bar hives. You can always put a pollen patty and sit it down on the bottom, at one end of the hive, and you can do it that way, or depending on the configuration of your lid for your top bar, like I have that domed lid type thing. You can set your pollen patty on top of your bars. In the winter, to winterize, what you can do is put pats of hay or flakes of hay or straw between the lid and your top bar and top of your bars, and do it that way. If we're going to have really cold weather, what I have done for a windbreak, because of the way I have my hive set up, is we'll put straw bales stacked up enough so that it blocks the wind from blowing underneath the hive, my top bars. And so I do it that way. As far as equipment, I use a hive tool like I would for anything else, to move my frames around. I do use the squish method, if I want to get honey, but I generally use my top bars more to just keep pollinators, if that makes sense. I might take off a frame or two for some honey, but I try not to do too much squishing of, or you can, like you said, you can uncap and just let it drip. If you're going to do the squish method, I just buy the paint strainers at Lowe's Hardware and put them over the top of a 5-gallon bucket. And I just crush it and plop it in there and put the lid on and bring it in a house in a warmer area and just let it drip through the paint strainer and do it that way. So it's just, there's some really good YouTube videos on top bar beekeeping. Michael Bush, if he's still up and running, I haven't checked his website in a long time, has good stuff on top bar keeping as well.
Right. And Christy Hemingway also.
Yes.
In fact, Christy is now in North Carolina down near Asheville.
Yeah. And I have her book. In fact, I might have it right here. Hang on.
I was going to mention that one of the things that we've done with some of the folks that have top bars is I've given them chunks of comb, and they've basically just used cotton string to attach them to a bar when they did packages to help keep them in. So yeah, you can do that. Rubber bands didn't work unless they were really thick rubber bands, because they just like smoosh.
Yeah. And I found that they tend to chew, the bees will destroy the string. If you even heavier string, I just had the better luck with the plastic zip ties, and I try not to use I try not to use plastic as much as possible in any of my hives. I don't know. Even in my Langstroth, I found that the bees do not care for the plastic foundation. That's just my experience. Yeah. But anyway, I've got this, it's called A Guide to Natural Beekeeping in Top Bar Hives by Christy Hemingway. And it's a wonderful book, and I recommend it for all top bar beekeepers. It's got some great information.
Right. And like I said, especially with her being, I've seen her speak at some of the North Carolina State Beekeeper conferences. And now that she's in North Carolina, she shows up a lot more. So
good. Yeah. Good. But so we've got both. I like it. And I think especially for people that are just interested in not having to deal with the weight of Langstroths, because I have to tell you, Amy, my husband says he's hired from the neck down, but moving those, I've developed bursitis and stuff as well, but even the shallows, when they're full, they are heavy.
Right.
And one of the tools that you did, I noticed that you didn't have on there, but I think it's worth investing in. Dadant makes it, and it's a frame to pick up. It's a frame for picking up boxes, and it takes 2 people. I don't know if you've seen those, Amy.
I have. Yep.
I've used it. It's a godsend for picking up the deeps and stuff as well.
Right. And y'all, you can't really see Elise, but she's just a little bitty thing. She weighs maybe 90 pounds wet.
Oh, I wish.
Yeah, she's just a little bitty thing, but she moves. She's got goats and stuff, and she just moves things around. She's way tougher than I would be. So it's good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. Yes. And also, Elise is one of the few people I know that's been really successful with top bars. You've been keeping them since 2011.
Yep. Now I will tell you, I had some swarms in my top bars this year. and they swarmed again, and then they all absconded. So I'm going to have to start over in my top bars this spring.
Yep.
But I just, yeah, it was a really nice swarm too, but that's a whole other story. And
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about that.
yeah, so, but yeah, it's just, it is it's more work. And I also treat my top bars the same way that I treat my Langstreths. I put an IPM board that I make, and I put, so I can do a mic count, and I just cut it out to fit the bottom of my top bar, and I put the Crisco on it and stuff, and then do a mic count the same way that I would in a Langstreth with an IPM board.
Right. So we'll talk about that when we talk about pests a little bit more. So
Yep.
that's good to
Yep.
know.
Yep.
Good.
Yep.
Great.
So
Thank you so much. I'm so
You're
glad you
welcome.
showed up. This is really good.
well, good. Well, I'm gonna run because I have some chores I need to go take care of, but I'll try to join you when you meet.
Okay, great. Okay, cool.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Okay, I'm going to do real quick. Warray hives, nobody really cares about warray, but basically you can see down in the bottom right corner, that's the frame. So it's basically a top bar with just a little bit of a frame, a little bit of a sidebar. And one of the problems with them is it's the same problem that we have with the Tanzanian hives top bar, is they tend to stick to the side. And so you'd have to go in with a hive tool or a knife to cut them loose. I do the 3-sided frames in my Langstreth, and that's my modified Warray. And it's kind of interesting and it's fun and it's whatever to use. So, and I do see there's questions coming in, and I will get to you guys in a minute. But anyway, you can see these are just some different things. You can see in the bottom left picture, that's basically just the 3-sided frame that they're using in, for Warray. And that's basically what I do. And I let the bees build down, and that works out fine. As Elise said, the comb is going to be kind of soft. As it ages, it gets a little bit sturdier. And so you'll be able to manhandle it a little bit better, but it's a different animal to work with, I'll just tell you. So horizontal or long hives, there's a couple different kinds. There's one that will take standard Langstreth deep frames, and they're just basically across. Now for somebody like me who is getting really weary of picking up boxes all the time, it would be really nice to be able to work at waist length. The other thing is with these long hives and the top bar hives, is you're working in one area, and if you're working in a Langstreth, you're picking up the box, you're disrupting the whole hive. You can work in a long hive or a top bar hive without disturbing a lot of bees, and less stings that way, for one thing. So this is what a horizontal or long hive looks like with just Langstreth deep frames in it. And then there's another kind of horizontal hive that actually comes from Russia. And if you go to horizontalhive.com, you can read all about it and get the plans for it. And it's called a Layens hive. And it's one of the original beekeeping hives in Russia. The frames are deeper and the walls of the hive are thicker. So the original Langstreth hive, the walls were actually thicker so that there was better temperature control for the bees. And the frames were really deeper than they are wide. And then when they commercialized it, they went with the lighter walls for being able to move them around, and the longer hives, because I guess that's just the cheaper way to cut the wood. So this is what a Layens horizontal hive frame looks like. You can see that it's lots deeper than it is wide. So when I do my 3-sided hive or my 3-sided frame and let the bees build down, that's what I'm going for. Now, why would we even do that? Well, when we start talking more about the bees in the hive, as they get cold, they cluster, and they'll cluster kind of in a ball. And what happens in the Langstreth that are wider is you'll end up, the bees out here on the end are not covered. And so there's something that you'll see called chilled brood, where those guys will die. So this is just a better way for the bees to be able to cover. And so it mimics more what they're actually doing if they're building in a tree. So it's more natural for them. So that's one of the reasons that we do lay-ins. And if you go to horizontalhive.com, Dr. Leo has different videos and whatever, and I've seen him speak. He's very interesting, very engaging. It's worth going and checking it out. Protective clothing, you want light or white because bees see dark and furry things as animals. Think bears, skunks, things like that. So that's why we wear lighter clothing. Ripstop nylon or the Tyvek painter suits are really effective, and they're fairly cool to use. And different beekeepers, some beekeepers don't use protective covering at all. It's really up to you. You want to be comfortable in your hive. If you're afraid of the bees, you won't be working the bees. So make sure you're comfortable. At the top is just different kinds of veils with hats. To the right is a full bee suit. Those things are heavy or hot, I'll just tell you. I have an inspection jacket. The ones in the bottom are just inspection jackets. They're jackets with elastic around the base and around the wrist, and then they have some kind of hood. Originally, I had a hood like the one on the right, but every time I'd lean over, it would fall off, and I didn't want to put ties on it, so I switched it out for the just the hood kind of things to the left. If you're going from bee yard to bee yard, the ones on the left work better too, because you could just flip it back and get in the car and go. Those ones on the right, they're a little bit bulkier. So just so you know. The other thing is, no matter what you do, you really want to either put your pant legs in your socks or put some kind of thing, because the bees that come off the frame are going to be in the ground. They're going to crawl up your leg. You're not going to know that they're there until they sting you up at your thigh. And it's not uncommon to see beekeepers taking their pants off in the field. So this is just whatever you can do to be comfortable is what you really want to do, because you don't want to be afraid of your bees. You don't want to be, fretting about anything. So that's just some of the things to think about. Protective gloves, you can buy really good gloves from a lot of the different bee suppliers. You can also use nitrile gloves like what the doctors use, and there's different thicknesses. The bees can sting through there, but the stinger won't get stuck in, and so you can easily take it out. A lot of the people that work for pollinators, like we have a pollinator in the west of North Carolina that runs 6,000 to 10,000 hives. The guys working his bees use kitchen gloves that they get at dollar store and different colors. Those work just perfectly fine. The problem I have with I really like the goat skin gloves, but the problem I have with those kinds of gloves is I have really small hands. My ring size is a 4. Finding gloves that fit me well really is difficult. I can't use a kid glove because they think kids' gloves fingers are all exactly the same height. So you end up with, an extra inch on your pinky, and it's just not, it just doesn't work really well. There was a glove manufacturer I really liked, and I should have bought a dozen of them, and I didn't. And they're unfortunately no longer available. But as more women get in to beekeeping, hopefully they'll start to make better gloves for smaller hands. So those are some of the things that you really need in terms of protective clothing. In terms of other equipment, smoker is one of the things you're just going to need to have. I originally had a 4x7 smoker. That was fine when I had 1 or 2 hives. As I started to add more hives, I found that the 4x10 would keep things going a lot longer. That extra chimney length just works better for me. So if you can afford the $10 or $15 extra, I would say go with the 4x10 smoker as opposed to the 4x7 smoker. And smoke fuels, you basically want things that are going to be that aren't going to spark. So you don't want to use things like newspaper or leaves or things like that that are going to put sparks out, because you don't want to set your hive on fire. You want it to be, and you don't want to use anything synthetic, because you don't want to kill your bees with fumes. You really, the reason for using the smoker, there's 2 reasons. One is it masks the pheromone that says intruder attack. And the other one is they think house is on fire, we better eat a lot because we're going to be out on the road. And if they've filled their bellies with honey, they can't sting. They can't bend their bodies to sting you. They have to regurgitate to sting you. So that's two of the reasons why we smoke. So something that's not synthetic cotton. I use either pine shavings or like poplar shavings and things that you would get in the pet store for like hamsters or stuff like that. Make sure it's not treated. Those things work pretty well. I use the cardboard from the egg cartons. I'll break those up and I'll use those as starter. So those are really pretty handy. If you're gonna use anything like leaves or any newspaper or anything to start, that's fine, but make sure it gets burned up before you start using it on your bees. You want the white, cool smoke coming out to puff the bees. So that's smoker. Hive tools are absolutely essential. You will need them. You'll use them for all kinds of things. The flat one on the top left is fairly inexpensive. I have a J hook that's the one on the bottom right. I really like it a lot. It's a little more expensive. It's probably $15 as opposed to $7. So, and I have a couple because I tend to lose them. To clean them, there's a couple different ways you can clean them. You can always just stick them in the dirt and that helps get some of the stuff off of them. I also carry a little bottle of alcohol and some paper towels, and I'll squirt the alcohol and clean them off. When I'm working my bees, I clean them between hives so that I'm not passing any kind of problem from hive to hive. So those are the things that you'll absolutely need. Then there's other kinds of things you may need. Bee brushes, I have a bee brush and I use it for some things. Some people will use it to like brush the bees off. Bees always get stuck in there and grumpy, and so I don't really do that. If I ever need to do brushing bees, I just go get a branch that has some nice leaves on it and use that, and that works fine. The uncapper on the right-hand side, you can use that for uncapping honey. I use it to uncap drone brood. And we'll talk about that when we start to talk about drones and why you might want to do that. And part of, we actually can use drones as a way to deal with the Varroa count. So I keep one of those in my bag and it's cheap. I don't know how much I paid for it, but not very much. A sweatband you will need because it gets really, really hot if you're in a veil, and having water run in your eyes is just awful. So something to keep. I use a bandana for the most part in time. And magnifying glasses are really helpful because if you're trying to look in a frame to see eggs and your eyes are like mine, see, I've got dollar glasses already. Having magnifying glasses are really, really helpful to see what's going on in there. Other things that you may want to carry is water. One of the things, I not only carry water, but I also put some emergency in my water because it's got electrolytes in it. And if I'm sweating a lot, I'm going to need the electrolytes. So make sure you have water. Matches are a lighter. I always have extra lighters. I put tape on the lighter I'm using so that I always know which one I'm using. And then, I have my backup. A baggie that has some wet paper towels or something because you'll get goo on your hands. So that's always helpful. A first aid kit with Benadryl is really good in case you get stung. If you have an EpiPen, that's also very good. Duct tape or Gorilla tape is always handy. And then I also keep some queen cages with some miniature marshmallows in my bag because if I've got a new queen coming out that I want to keep, I can put her in the cage and use the miniature marshmallow to block the hole in the cage. So that's kind of one of the things that I do. We'll talk about other things as we start talking about actually being in the hives and also doing pest management. There's a lot more stuff that you may need, but these are just to kind of get you going. Where to buy, if you want to go to my Bumbling Beekeeper, under the resource tab is suppliers. And I've listed everybody that I know about in this area. And so you can decide based on, they're all good, reputable places. So next week, we're going to be talking about races of honeybees, some basic honeybee biology and the life cycle of bee. On my website, check about Wednesday. I'm going to include some links to some videos on life cycle of bee that you may want to watch before you come. So I just mentioned that. And I'll try to get an email out to people with some reminders about that as well. Okay, so that's it for these. I'm going to stop sharing, and then I want to look at the questions real quick. And I appreciate people hanging in with me. I'm sorry this went long. This is kind of what happens. Any pros, cons to 8-frame versus 10-frame? The only thing I can say is 8-frame are going to be about 15 to 20 pounds lighter. As far as the bees are concerned, I haven't noticed any real difference. I don't know if there's anybody out there that has a differing opinion. Let me know, but I haven't really seen. If you think about bees in a tree, you know, 8-frame is not any smaller than a tree, so that's kind of and there's a lot of 8-frame equipment out there. So flow hive, I'm really not the person to talk to about flow hives because I don't have a lot of good things to say about flow hives. I think if you're someplace that's warm and has regular food, like all year round, like San Diego, or where they were made for, which is New Zealand or Australia, then it would probably work fairly well. They're very expensive and they don't really work very well, and they don't overwinter very well here from what I can tell. I don't know. In terms of pest management, there's pest management no matter what you do. I haven't seen any different. Oh, Janice, you're here, right? You can unmute yourself. Do you have any opinion on 8-frame versus 10-frame? Is there any reason to not do 8-frame short of that you know of?
No, I think it, like you said, they're a little bit lighter, but we just started out with 10 frames and that's all we run. But
Right.
yeah.
Well, you know, the pollinators, like the folks going to California, have typically been 10-frame, and recently they've started to switch over to 8-frame. So you know, I mean, you can still, I mean, my hives go up, so I'm still doing, you know, 60 to 80,000 bees during the summer in one of my boxes, and I've started to do 5-frame through the winter, and my 5-frames are doing better through the winter, and I don't know why that is, but I don't know. And I really think well, I do have opinions about why I think the 5-frames made it through this winter and the biggest 8-frame didn't, but you know, we'll talk about that later. Plastic frames, you use plastic frames, right? And you've never had any problems with plastic frames.
It depends. Sometimes they'll pull them out and sometimes they won't. We've used the yellow and we've also used the black. Can't really tell a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, Bobby says that with the top bar, he's used some old comb and some floral wire to wire the comb to the top bar. So that's a good idea too.
Plus, we used to shake packages, and having the plastic, it just seemed to be more sturdy. But now that we're not, we still do both.
Right, right. A lot of the thing that I've heard is a lot of people say that depending on where they are, you always were able to have your bees in like orchards and things like that. And so I think they, you know, if there's good nectar flow, they're more likely to pull the comb than if not.
Right.
In terms of health of the bees, the only thing that I can see that would be different in terms of the viability of the bees and keeping them healthy is, like I said, with the long hives, you're just working in one area and you're not disrupting everything. As I get older, I'm a lot clunkier while I'm picking up boxes and stuff, and all that's going to affect the bees. On the other hand, if I have a frame that I can actually really look at and manhandle, I'm more likely to be able to identify pathogens and things early on. So you know, my feeling is start with something like a Langstroth or even a long hive that has 4-sided frames until you really get used to noticing things about the bees early on before you try to do something else like with a top bar or something like that. Elise started with top bars and she was real successful throughout, but you know, every beekeeper is different. The bees adapt to the beekeeper. So, I mean, it's just, you'll figure out what works for you if you can hang in there long enough. And good genetics is so important. I'll just tell you, which is one of the reasons I'm so sad that Janice isn't raising queens anymore, because they had such good bees. So, okay, so that's everything I have. We've gone way long. I'm so grateful that you guys have hung in. Next week, we'll be talking about life cycle and things like that. Hopefully, I'll be able to keep it to an hour. If you have questions, feel free to text me, email me. If you're going to call me, text me first and make sure you let me know who you are before, you know, when you text, so that I know who you are the first time. And I'm going to stop the recording now.